Live your life within the moment, and don't go wait until the morning. You never know when
It's summer. I'm going to cut it low to like here. Like it's just too high. What's up, Katie Baz, and welcome back to another tutorial. This is going to be for this gorgeous, classy, chic, a little bit sexy jumpsuit I have on here. This jumpsuit has a V neckline, a 3/4 sleeve, and the pants are actually like culotte length, so it's below the knee but it's above the ankle, so it's kind of like that mid calf, which you can wear with both flats and with heels. It has pockets as well, so we know we're going to be styling this in all kinds of fun ways. If you want to see how I make the sewing pattern, how I cut and stitched everything all together, the fitting and all that good stuff, make sure to keep on watching all the way till the end. At this point, give this video a thumbs up so it helps it reach more people on YouTube. And let's get into this tutorial. And I need to find somewhere to wear this outfit to because it's just too nice to be wearing inside the house. Like, we need to wear this out. Let's find a place. Let's make an event and go, because it cannot just waste, honestly. These are the measurements I'm going to be taking down to work with for this project. I highly recommend you work with yours or that of your client for the best outcome. The fabric I'm going to be using is this gorgeous blue, green, purple, white, and black print. I ended up using 4 meters for this jumpsuit. If you are looking to shop Ankara fabrics, you can check out the ones available on the Kim Dave store. These are 6-yard bundles and shipping is available worldwide. Link is going to be down below. Now let's get into creating the sewing patterns. I have my basic bodice pattern. This I have created from a previous tutorial. I have the front and the back, and I'm going to be working with the size 10. The particular one I'm using here is a print off from my PDF basic bodice pattern that goes from a size 6 to 16. I'll also be working with my basic trouser pattern, which I did in a tutorial from a couple of years back. I have my front and my back, and I'm going to be using that. The sleeve of choice is this puff sleeve, which I did from yet another tutorial. So if you've seen a lot of my older videos and you already have these patterns, it's going to save you a lot of time when it comes to making the patterns for this jumpsuit. Now I'm going to go ahead to create the top half of the jumpsuit patterns. I've gone in to trace off the top half of my basic bodice up onto the waistline. I actually worked with a half length of 15 inches, so from my shoulder to the waistline is 15 inches here. I traced off the front, the back, as well as the darts because I want to be able to shape that part of the top nicely. I also wanted to shape the center back as well so it sits nice and smoothly on the back of my body. Moving on to adapting the top patterns for the particular neckline and fit, I'm going to go in to change the shape of the neckline and the arm curve on the top. Now I want a V neckline that sits roughly 2.5 inches below the natural neckline that my basic bodice has, and I just shaped it in by 1 inch along the shoulder so it's a little bit away from the neck. Now the shoulder width for my jumpsuit is 3 inches. You can make yours thinner if you want. I just wanted something a little bit more narrow compared to the wider shoulder width that my basic bodice pattern has. Now I'm just going in here to add a 1 centimeter seam allowance, so this allows me to actually cut the pattern onto fabric and join panels together without me losing any of my measurement. Next up, I'm going in to cut out my top front pattern. This I'm going to be cutting on a fold, so I have one piece that goes across. This is optional, but I just wanted to drop my neckline even more. I'm just going in to drop it to about the level of my bust line. Later on, I even dropped it a lot more because I just wanted something a little bit more sexy for the summer because it's really warm in this country, and I just wanted that part of the piece to be a bit more opened. Now that I'm done with my front, I'm going to set it aside to work on the back. I'm going to make the same changes I made on the front. So I would need to shift the neckline in by about 1 inch, and then the shoulder width is 3 inches, so the front and the back shoulders actually match. Now I'm just going in here to draw the back neckline, and then I'm going to draw in the new back arm curve so it opens it up a little bit. After that is all done, I'm going in to add a 1 centimeter seam allowance. You can work with whatever seam allowance that you are comfortable working with. Some people work with a centimeter, 1 inch, half an inch, and then I cut out the back top pattern. So we have the top half of the jumpsuit done. So we have the front and the back, and then the sleeve, which I've already done from a previous tutorial, and I'm going to set these aside and focus on working on the bottom. Like I did with the top pattern, I've gone in to trace off the front trouser pattern, ensuring I transfer my darts, my notches, and any other important information that I want to keep on the new trouser pattern. Now my trouser length is 32 inches because I kind of want it to be like an ankle grazer, so it's below my knee but above my ankle. I'm also going to be making the leg wider, and I'm extending it sideways by 3.5 inches on the outer leg, and then on the inner leg I'm going to be extending it outwards by 2 inches. Now I'm going to go ahead to draw in that new inseam like so a straightish on this end, and then I'm going to curve it back into that bottom crotch area. Now, to ensure that the inseam length is actually accurate, I measured this on myself, and I'm just going ahead to mark this along the inseam of the leg. After marking that, I'm going to go ahead to draw in the hemline of the front, which curves in from that part to the side seam or the outer leg. Now once that is all done, I'm going ahead to add a 1 centimeter seam allowance around my trouser pattern. This is going to allow me to cut the pattern onto fabric and then join it to the back and the top half to create the full jumpsuit. Once the seam allowance is all added, I'm cutting out my front pattern, ensuring that I added my annotations, my grain lines and notches, so it just makes my life a whole lot easier when I'm actually working with this pattern, or if I give it to someone else to use. Once I'm all done with the front pattern, I'm going to go ahead to work on the back, following the similar steps that we did for the front. I'm going ahead to mark the trouser length of 32 inches, and then I'm going to extend on the outer leg by 3.5 inches and 2 inch on the inner leg, and then draw in the new side seams. Another way you can do this is to actually slash and spread your pattern. If you kind of want to be sure that you're adding the same amount of volume on the front and on the back, you can essentially just slash your pattern through the middle and spread it by about 5 inch. You will get roughly the same amount of volume that you will get as what I've done here. Now, to ensure that the length on the front and the back is the same, I'm just using my front as a reference to mark the shape of the hemline and then the length as well. This will just guide me, so if I cut the front and the back, everything actually fits and they connect together correctly. Once that was all done, I'm going in to add my 1 centimeter seam allowance around my back trouser pattern, cut out the pattern, and this is what the pattern for the back trouser is looking like. The last piece of pattern I created was for a pocket. This is optional, but I've just been enjoying putting pockets on clothes these days, and the pocket opening width along the side edge is 6.5 inches, and then I just like to draw in pocket bag shapes by hand. This you can do with a ruler, but I just find doing it by hand gives me the result that I want, and then I connect all those dashed lines together using my pattern master. Add my seam allowance along the side seam, which is where it will be stitched into the trouser of the jumpsuit. Add my grain line, my annotations, and cut out the pocket pattern itself. You can also add a welt pocket if you don't want to do an inseam pocket like I have done here. These are all of the patterns all done. I ended up with a total of 5 that we made in this video, and then the 6th one is the sleeve from a previous tutorial. You can also incorporate any other sleeve design that you like. If you want to try like a normal short sleeve, a long sleeve, a cap sleeve. I'm going to link other sleeve tutorials down below if you don't want to do the puff sleeve like I have done here. You can also make your jumpsuit sleeveless if you want. If you've watched so far, please give this video a thumbs up. Let's try and get this tutorial to 500 likes so more people can enjoy it on YouTube. Now I'm going to go ahead to cut my jumpsuit onto fabric. I have pinned it onto my material and I'm cutting out my top front, my top back. I will also go ahead to cut out my trouser pieces, cut out my pockets, which I'll need to pair off, and as well as my sleeve. So I have all of my pieces ready together to be joined. Don't forget to cut your notches. I swear they make joining pieces and sewing a lot easier. So I am done cutting out the top, the bottom, the pocket and the sleeve of the jumpsuit, and I'm just going to go in to pin the darts, stitch everything together. I actually have to wear this jumpsuit for an event on Monday and I'm hoping I won't be too hot, but I wanted to add sleeves so it's something I can wear all year round and it's like a very versatile style. So these are all of the pieces cut out here. I have the top and the bottom, then I have my pocket pieces. I've cut two pairs of the pocket bag, and then I have my sleeve here. So I'm just going to go into, start sewing, do a fitting just to be sure that everything is comfortable on. I was torn on adding a belt to the waist. Let me know what you guys think. Should I add a waist belt or should I just leave it like that? Maybe add a contrasting leather belt, maybe in black or in silver. We'll see. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, but let's get into sewing. Now moving on to sewing the jumpsuit, I'm going in here to transfer the dart point from my pattern onto the wrong side of my fabric, and I'm going to do this by passing a pin through and marking that point with a chalk. Once I have the point marked, I'm going to pull out the pin and the pattern, and because I had notched the width of the dart along the waistline, I am going in to just fold in the dart. This is the wrong side of my fabric, by the way. Fold that in, pin it in place. This I'm going to do for the darts on the front of my top, and I'm going to repeat the same thing for the darts on the back as well. I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to be sewing using a normal straight stitch, remembering to do a reverse stitch at the beginning and at the end of my dart to secure it in place. And then once I have the dart stitched together, I'm going to be joining the shoulder of my front to my back. This I'm just going to be joining on a 1 centimeter seam allowance because that's how much seam allowance I added to my pattern, and then overlock it afterwards. I'm going to go ahead to repeat this on the other shoulder seam for my top and then work on joining the sleeve to the armhole of my top. Joining sleeves on the flat like this is a lot easier and a bit more straightforward to do, but because I want to gather the sleeve head of my sleeve, I am going to sew with the longest stitch on my machine just along the sleeve head, and then I'm going to pull the threads so that creates gathers that I can then stitch onto the top of my arm curve along that area where like the shoulder seam is. Now I'm going to just pull those gathers in place so everything is nice and tight, and then I'm going to pin the sleeve into the arm curve of the top, putting right sides together. Notches are going to make this a lot easier, especially when you're matching like that shoulder point to the top of the sleeve head. And I'm just going in here to sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, joining this particular sleeve to this side of my top. I'm going to go ahead to overlock this afterwards and repeat the same thing on the other side. Now that I have the sleeves joined in place, I'm going to join the side seams of the sleeve and the top of the jumpsuit in one go. So with one continuous stitch, I am able to sew up the side seam of the sleeves. When I get to that bottom of the armhole, I just turn the garment and then continue sewing along the side seam. I went ahead to overlock this afterwards, but at this point I actually thought the sleeve shape was very cool. I was very tempted to leave it as this like flared sleeve. Let me know what your thoughts are. Should we try out a project with this flared sleeve? Because I thought this was actually very cool, but I knew I'd already committed to a puff sleeve. Now to make the puff sleeve, I'm going to make a tunnel along the hemline, and the tunnel has to be wide enough to take my elastic band. Now I'm going to sew around, leaving a slight opening for me to pass my elastic band through. That way I'm able to add the elastic band that would then gather in the bottom of the sleeve. Now through that opening that I left, I'm going to attach an elastic band to a safety pin. I worked with like an elastic band that was like 1/2 inch wide. This one wasn't super wide, and the length of the elastic is at least half of your entire sleeve hem width. So I'm just going to pass the elastic through with the help of my safety pin, pass it until I get to the other side, and then pull both ends out. Hold that down with a pin and then sew the ends of the elastic close. This you should ideally do with a zigzag stitch, but I did it with a normal straight stitch with my machine, but I stitched it twice just to ensure that it doesn't break and it doesn't get loose when I wear this jumpsuit over time. I chopped off the excess elastic on the ends and then sewed close the opening that I left of my sleeve hem. So this is what the top of the jumpsuit is looking like so far. It already looks like a very cool like crop top. So if you wanted to have like a top and a pair of culottes, this is another way that you could create this if you don't want to make a jumpsuit. This is what the back is looking like. It's nice and neat. I tried it on at this point just to be sure that I like the way everything fits before going in to work on the trouser or the bottom half of this jumpsuit. And I'm going to start off by adding the pocket in. The pocket I'm adding 2.5 inches below the waistline, and I'm going to put right sides together of the pocket bag along the side. Now I'm going to do one on this side and one on the left, and this is for the front of the trouser, and I'm going to repeat the same thing for the back and then join them together to create the pocket bag. Now I'm just joining it along the side seam like so. I'm going to go ahead to overlock this afterwards. I gave this a nice press, and I'm going to go ahead to repeat the same thing on the back of the trouser panels. Now once that is stitched on the back, I'm going to put right sides together of my front and my back trouser pieces together. This I put right sides together facing each other, and I'm going to be sewing up the side seam so it goes around the pocket bag down the side, and I'm also going to be joining the inner leg or the inseam of the front to the back for the left and the right leg. So we still have that like crouch or middle seam open at this point. And I'm just going in here to stitch around the pocket like so, and once I make my way to the end of that pocket seam, turn towards the side and then just stitch till I get to the hemline, and then I'm going to go ahead to sew the inner leg or the inseam, overlock everything, and this is what it looks like. So once the left leg is done, I went ahead to work on the right leg, and then I know I can go ahead to join both sides together with right sides facing each other. I'm going to sew up the entire front up to the back and then leave about 10 to 12 inches open on the back seam, so it allows me to add my zip on the back of the jumpsuit. Now I'm just sewing the crouch seam like so, sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and because I had notches in place, it kind of helped and guided me when I was joining the seams together. Once I get to that middle crouch point, I'm going to leave my needle in and then turn my piece so I can sew to the back and then stop at a good point to allow me to add my zip on the back of my jumpsuit. Next up, I'm going to join the top to the bottom along the waistline, and I'm just going to put right side together of my top and my trouser in place. Now I'm going to join center front to center front, side seam to side seam, and center back to center back. This I always like to pin before I go ahead to sew, so I'm able to keep everything intact before actually stitching them together. I'm going to be stitching it up on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, overlock it, press it, and then I'm going to try it on to check that I like the way everything fits. Alright, this is what the fit of the jumpsuit looks like. So far so good. There are just a few things that I would correct if I were to do this again. I feel like the crouch is just a little bit too high, because if I stand, it's doing this weird V thing, and that means that it's pulling right at the middle point. So I should have either added just a little bit to the waistline of the top or the bottom. I know where the problem came from, Sha. My half length was 15. I think I should have made it either 15 and a half or 16 inches, then that would have gotten rid of it. But if I like pose, you won't see it. But once I stand with my leg closed, you will not see this thing that is doing there. So that's the first issue I have. The second is I think the neckline is too high. I'm sorry, it's summer. I'm going to cut it low to like here. Like, it's just too high. I don't know, personal preference. I think I'll drop it by like 2 inches, just from the neckline down to like here. That's the second thing. Everything else, I mean, I'm not mad. I'll most likely style this with heels because it's giving Maria Maka vibes otherwise, because top is covered, leg is covered. So I think I'll do like maybe like little heels because it is the length I wanted. I wanted it like culotte length. So it's like an ankle grazer. So that I'm happy about. Sleeve, I don't mind. Sleeve looks really, really gorgeous. But I just think the crotch is a little bit too tight. Ooh. Oh, gosh. See, this is a mistake that came from the pattern as well. So the trousers don't have the dart stitched in, and that's because there was no dart to be stitched in. By the time I joined the waistline of the top to the bottom, I noticed that because I lifted the waistline of the top ended up being wider than the trouser, hence why I just stitched it in like that. You won't even really notice it because it's a print fabric, but there's actually no dart. The trouser has no dart, like there's nothing there. So be mindful when you're creating your own pattern to avoid this mistake, except if you don't mind it. But this is the fit of the jumpsuit. I'm just going to go ahead and finish it, make the changes, and pack it for my trip. I'm going to go ahead to sew my invisible zip along the center back of my jumpsuit, which I've already overlocked, and I'm just pinning the invisible zip along the open center back edge. I'm working with like a navy blue one because that just looked like the best color match for this particular fabric that I have in place. Once everything is pinned together, I'm actually going to open up the zip. It allows me to stitch invisible zips a lot easier, and as I sew, I am slightly unrolling that zip, so it allows me to stitch as close as possible to the zip teeth. I'm going to stitch on this side and then turn the zip or the piece to the other side and stitch it together in place. Once I have the zip sewn into the center back of the jumpsuit, I need to finish the neckline, and I'm going to be using bias tape. This I used black. I should really have used navy blue, but black was what I had around, and I'm going to be using that in this case. I'm going to be sewing it first open like this, so that way I'm able to stitch it one way, and then I can go back in, fold the bias tape around that seam, and use it to finish off the neckline of my jumpsuit. Another way you can do this is you can create a facing piece and stitch that onto the neckline of your jumpsuit if you don't want to use bias binding. That way you have sort of like more control and it's not as fiddly, especially because this is a V neckline. So when you get to that front point, you need to leave your needle in and then turn your piece, drop your footer, and continue to sew until you reach the other center back edge. Now I'm just going to go and wrap the bias binding around like so, fold it twice, and then stitch along the inner side of the neckline to finish off the neckline of the jumpsuit, finish off that center back edge where the zip was, and just have a nicely folded and finished neckline of my jumpsuit. I will say sewing V neckline points can be a bit tricky. You have to mark the exact point with a chalk or a pin so you know at which point you have to like make your turn on the front of your piece. Once that is all done, I'm going to go ahead to do the last piece of work, which is folding and sewing the hemline of my jumpsuit. This I've already overlocked and I'm just folding it by about 1 inch or 2 centimeters and sewing across like so. This is what the finished piece looks like. It came out so nicely, a lot better than I anticipated, in all honesty. I got that I didn't get to wear this for the event, but I'm just keeping it for another event in the future. I added a belt because I just wanted that definition around the waist. This I can wear with a thinner belt, a wider belt, or with no belt at all if I wanted. This will also be cute styled with a white shirt underneath when it gets a bit cooler in the year. But if you guys enjoyed this project, please give it a thumbs up. If you'll be recreating this, don't forget to tag me on social media at Kim Dave Designs. And until my next video, have a good morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are. Bye.
Live your life within the moment. And don't go wait until the morning. You never know when it is over. All that I know is we'll get older. So let us dance this night away. Our bodies move to the groove and the light that flickers. We get lost in the crowd, it's getting thicker.